Darkness held the land of Egypt. The Israelites cried out. They were slaves. A baby was born. His name was Moses. He was destined for greatness. His mother made a difficult choice. Pharaoh wanted all male Israelite babies killed. She put Moses in a basket. She set him adrift on the Nile River. She prayed for his safety. Pharaoh's daughter found the basket. She saw the baby inside. Her heart was moved. She decided to raise him. Moses grew up in the palace. He lived a life of privilege, yet his true heritage remained a secret waiting to be revealed. His destiny called. Moses grew older. He learned of his true origins. He was an Israelite. His people suffered. He felt torn. He lived in luxury. His heart ached for his people's freedom. He witnessed the cruelty. Egyptian taskmasters abused the Israelites. Moses felt anger. He felt compassion. He felt conflicted. He struggled with his identity. One day Moses saw something extraordinary, a burning bush. It was not consumed by the flames. He drew closer. A voice called out his name. Moses, Moses, God spoke to him. He revealed his plan. Moses was chosen. He would lead the Israelites out of slavery. Fear filled Moses. He questioned his ability. God reassured him, I will be with you. Moses' life would change forever. His two worlds would collide. Moses lived a quiet life. He was a shepherd. He tended his flocks. He was far from the grandeur of Pharaoh's palace. He was alone with his thoughts. He contemplated his destiny. He knew his people suffered. He carried the burden of their plight. He felt inadequate. He felt unworthy of the task ahead. He grappled with his doubts. He questioned his abilities. He wandered the wilderness. He sought solace in the solitude. He searched for answers. He yearned for guidance. The desert stretched before him, vast and empty, a reflection of his inner turmoil. The sun beat down upon him. He felt the heat. He felt the weight of his responsibility. He was a simple shepherd. He was chosen to lead a nation. The task seemed impossible. Moses saw a strange sight, a bush engulfed in flames, yet it did not burn. He was drawn to it. He felt a sense of awe. He felt a sense of wonder. He approached cautiously. He felt a presence, a holy presence. He heard a voice. It called his name. Moses, Moses. He answered, Here I am. God spoke to Moses. He revealed his divine plan. Moses was to lead the Israelites. He was to deliver them from slavery. Moses felt overwhelmed. He questioned God. Who am I to do this? He expressed his doubts. He felt inadequate. God reassured him, I will be with you. God would empower him. God would guide him. Moses received his calling. He felt the weight of responsibility. He was chosen by God. He was tasked with a monumental mission. He was to confront Pharaoh. He was to demand freedom for his people. He was filled with trepidation. He was uncertain of the outcome. He knew the task would be difficult. He knew Pharaoh was powerful. He accepted his destiny. He embraced his role as leader. He knew he could not refuse God's command. He prepared himself for the journey. He would face Pharaoh. He would lead his people to freedom. He would trust in God's promise. He would rely on God's strength. He would fulfill his purpose. Moses returned to Egypt. He was accompanied by his brother Aaron. They stood before Pharaoh. They delivered God's message, Let my people go. Pharaoh scoffed. He refused to listen. He saw the Israelites as his slaves. He would not relinquish his control. He mocked Moses and Aaron. He questioned their authority. He challenged their God. Moses and Aaron stood firm. They repeated God's command, Let my people go. Pharaoh's heart hardened. He refused to yield. He dismissed them from his presence. He ordered the taskmasters to increase the Israelites' workload. He wanted to break their spirit. He wanted to crush their hope. He underestimated the power of God. He would soon learn his lesson. The confrontation was just the beginning. Pharaoh remained defiant. He refused to release the Israelites. He ignored God's warnings. He mocked Moses and Aaron. He challenged their God. Plagues began to strike Egypt. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs infested the land. Gnats swarmed everywhere. Pharaoh remained unmoved. He attributed the plagues to natural causes. He refused to acknowledge God's power. He clung to his pride. He would not be swayed. He continued to oppress the Israelites. He increased their burdens. He hardened his heart against God's will. He believed he was invincible. He thought he was above God. He would soon realize his mistake. The plagues intensified. Egypt suffered. The power of God. The plagues continued. Flies swarmed the land. Livestock died. Boils covered the Egyptians. Hail and fire rained down. Locusts devoured everything. Darkness covered the land. Pharaoh witnessed the devastation. He felt the impact of the plagues. He began to waver. He considered releasing the Israelites, but his pride held him back. He still refused to acknowledge God's power. He clung to his stubbornness. He would not fully surrender. He offered compromises. He proposed partial freedom. Moses refused. He demanded complete freedom for all Israelites. He would not settle for less. He knew God's will. He stood firm. He trusted in God's power. A turning point. The final plague arrived, the death of the firstborn. Every Egyptian household was affected. A cry of anguish filled the land. Pharaoh's own son died. His heart was finally broken. He felt the weight of his actions. He realized the extent of his mistake. He had defied God for too long. He had caused immense suffering. He summoned Moses and Aaron. He begged them to leave. He granted the Israelites their freedom. He urged them to depart quickly. He feared further wrath from God. He finally acknowledged God's power. He surrendered to his will. He realized his own limitations. He had learned a painful lesson. The Exodus was imminent. The Israelites were finally free, a turning point in history. The night of salvation. God instructed Moses. He gave specific instructions. The Israelites were to prepare. They were to celebrate the Passover. It was a night of salvation. It was a night of deliverance. Each family was to take a lamb without blemish. They were to slaughter it. They were to apply its blood to their doorposts. This was a sign for the angel of death. The angel of death would pass through Egypt. He would strike down the firstborn, but he would pass over the houses marked with blood. The blood of the lamb would protect them. The Israelites followed God's instructions. They prepared the Passover meal. They ate unleavened bread. They ate bitter herbs. They roasted the lamb. They were ready. They awaited their freedom. Symbols of redemption. The Passover lamb was a symbol of sacrifice, a symbol of redemption. Its blood protected the Israelites. It spared them from death. The unleavened bread symbolized haste. The Israelites were leaving Egypt quickly. They had no time for their bread to rise. They were fleeing slavery. They were embracing freedom. The bitter herbs symbolized the bitterness of slavery. They reminded the Israelites of their suffering. They reminded them of the hardships they had endured. They appreciated their newfound freedom. The Passover was a reminder of God's power, a reminder of God's faithfulness. He had heard their cries. He had answered their prayers. He had delivered them from bondage. The Passover was a celebration of life, a celebration of freedom. Freedom's dawn. Night fell upon Egypt. Darkness covered the land. The angel of death passed through. He struck down the firstborn of Egypt. A cry of anguish filled the air. Pharaoh's heart was broken. His own son had died. He finally relented. He released the Israelites. He urged them to leave. He feared further punishment. The Israelites departed. They left Egypt in haste. They carried their belongings. They carried their memories. They carried their hopes for a new beginning. The sun rose on the horizon. A new day dawned, a day of freedom, a day of hope. The Israelites were finally free. They were on their way to the promised land. Their exodus had begun. Their journey to freedom had commenced. They looked forward to a brighter future. Flight from Egypt, the Israelites journeyed. They left the land of their captivity. They moved forward with hope. They carried their belongings. They carried their memories, both bitter and sweet. They carried the promise of a new beginning. They traveled through the desert. The sun beat down upon them. The journey was arduous, but their spirits were high. They were free. They were on their way to the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. They sang songs of praise. They thanked God for their deliverance. They remembered his mighty acts. They recalled the plagues that had brought Pharaoh to his knees. They knew they were under God's protection. They looked forward to the future. They dreamed of a better life, a life free from slavery, a life of peace and prosperity. They trusted in God's promise. He would lead them to their new home. He would guide them every step of the way. The Israelites continued their journey. They reached the edge of the Red Sea. They looked out across the vast expanse of water, and their hearts sank. They were trapped. Pharaoh had changed his mind. He regretted letting the Israelites go. He had lost his slaves, his source of labor. He was filled with anger and was determined to recapture them. He assembled his army, and his chariots raced across the desert, pursuing the Israelites. They were closing in. The Israelites felt fear and panic. They cried out to Moses, questioning his leadership and blaming him for their predicament. They longed for the safety of Egypt and regretted leaving their familiar surroundings. They had escaped slavery, but now they faced a new threat, the sea before them and the army behind them. They were caught between two dangers. Moses stood before the people. He calmed their fears. He reassured them. He reminded them of God's power. He told them to trust in God's plan. God spoke to Moses. He instructed him, "Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea. The waters will part. The Israelites will walk through on dry ground." Moses obeyed God's command. He raised his staff. He stretched out his hand. The wind blew strong. The sea began to churn. The waters parted. A dry path appeared, a path through the sea. The Israelites were amazed. They witnessed the miracle. They saw God's power at work. They regained their faith. They followed Moses. They walked through the sea on dry ground. They were escaping their pursuers. They were on their way to freedom. The Israelites walked through the Red Sea. They walked on dry ground. The waters formed walls on either side. They were protected. They were safe. They moved forward with renewed hope. Pharaoh's army followed. They chased the Israelites into the sea. They were confident. They were arrogant. They thought they would recapture their slaves. They underestimated God's power. The Israelites reached the other side. They were safe. They watched as Pharaoh's army continued their pursuit. The waters began to close. The walls of water collapsed. Pharaoh's army was engulfed. The chariots and soldiers were swept away. The sea returned to its normal state. The Israelites were saved. They were delivered from their enemies. They had witnessed a miracle of deliverance. They celebrated their freedom. They sang praises to God. He had saved them. He had led them to safety. They were ready for their new beginning. The Israelites stood on the shore. They were free. They had crossed the Red Sea. They had escaped Pharaoh's army. They had witnessed God's power. They had experienced his deliverance. They were filled with awe. They were filled with gratitude. They looked back at the sea. The waters were calm. There was no trace of the Egyptian army. They were gone, swallowed by the waves. The Israelites were safe. They were finally free. They had escaped the bonds of slavery. They began their journey. They traveled towards the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land of freedom and opportunity. They were led by Moses, God's chosen leader. He guided them. He instructed them. He inspired them. He taught them about God's law. He taught them about God's love. He taught them about God's faithfulness. He reminded them of their heritage. He reminded them of their destiny. He instilled in them hope for the future. He encouraged them to trust in God. They were his chosen people. The story of Moses echoes through time. It is a story of faith. It is a story of courage. It is a story of deliverance. It is a story of hope. It reminds us of God's power. It reminds us of his love. Moses was a humble shepherd. He was chosen by God. He led his people to freedom. He faced challenges. He overcame obstacles. He trusted in God's guidance. He never gave up. He fulfilled his purpose. We can learn from Moses. We can learn to trust in God even in difficult times. We can learn to have courage even when we are afraid. We can learn to persevere even when we face obstacles. God has a plan for each of us. He calls us to follow him. He promises to guide us. He promises to strengthen us. He promises to deliver us just as he delivered the Israelites. We can have faith in his promises. We can find hope in his love. The story of Moses inspires us. It encourages us. It reminds us that with God, all things are possible. Join us next time as we dive deeper into the stories of faith that continue to inspire and transform lives. Don't forget to watch the next video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. God bless you.